Recently, you may have seen ads like these, popping up on various social media apps, telling you about the chance to bet on the upcoming presidential election. Or headlines like these, telling you that betting on elections is now legal. All of this comes down to an ongoing court battle between the Commodity Futures Trading Commission and the financial exchange Kalshi. But first, let's take a look at the strange history of election betting in America. Now, the idea of betting on elections seems foreign to many Americans nowadays. Elections are a sacred function of democracy and can have lasting consequences, so gambling on them feels like it's on the same level of morbidity as betting when your dog is going to die, or doing a parlay on which two of your wife's friends will divorce first. But this country has a long history of betting on elections going back to the early 1800s. As these papers by Paul Rode and Coleman Strumpf explain, the tradition really intensified during the Jacksonian era, with up to $6 million being wagered in New York during the 1844 presidential election between Henry Clay and James Polk. The practice reached another peak starting in the 1880s and 1890s and lasting until the 1910s, with about $10 million in political bets wagered in New York in 1916. Newspapers regularly reported on the market odds for election bets, which allowed everyday people to keep up with how presidential races were going. In a time before reliable scientific polling, these gambling odds were the closest to consistent and reliable sources that many people had on which way the election might swing. Interestingly, for most people during this era, betting wasn't seen as a way to make money as much as it was just another way to support a candidate that you were going to vote for anyway, or a way to back your beliefs. Many of these bets didn't even involve money. Freak bets, as Rode and Strumpf call them, involved wild dares that you'd have to do if your candidate lost, like pushing your friend around in a wheelbarrow, or whatever kinky stuff this guy is doing. One estimate stated that there were 500,000 of these freak bets in the election of 1900 alone. And hey, let's bring that back instead of gambling money on the outcome. Wearing a dog collar and walking around on all fours seems infinitely more fun than just betting money online against a stranger. But if we look at sites like Kalshi, the idea of monetarily backing one's beliefs still seems to be the case with many of these recent election bets. People seem not to be betting on what they perceive to be the most likely outcome, but on the candidate they align with ideologically, including this person saying that no one is going to stop my little shorty from becoming president. I don't think those are the exact words that people would use while betting in the 1800s, but the sentiment is there. Eventually, election betting declined in the 1930s and 40s for many reasons, primarily due to the rise in more scientific polls like Gallup that could offer up-to-date electoral predictions without the social stigma of gambling. Other factors, like the suppression of illegal gambling and the legalization of horse racing, also drew people away from election betting. Yep, people stopped betting on presidential elections once they realized it was much easier and quicker to just bet on horses instead. So what brought the practice back? Well, the way that people can bet on elections now is through what's known as event contracts, which are agreements to buy or sell a commodity asset for a predetermined price at a certain point in the future, dependent on the outcome of a specific event. Basically, you buy in on a certain position, which is either yes or no to whether that event will happen, and if you're right, you receive money. These types of contracts are regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, which tried to prevent the trading of event contracts tied to the outcomes of elections by saying they were classified as election gambling. However, the district court found that there was not sufficient evidence that this was gambling, and the appeals court agreed, allowing Kalshi to continue letting people place bets on elections. So there you have it. It's not gambling, it's just placing money on a discrete outcome that you have no control over, in which you will receive more money than you put in. Very different from gambling. But the proliferation of election betting raises another problem. As more and more news outlets and even presidential candidates start using betting odds as evidence of who will win the election, there comes the question, how accurate are these odds compared to polling? I mean, why does 538 show Kamala Harris having a 54% chance of winning and Kalshi show Trump having a 57% chance? If we look at how Kalshi determines their odds, we can see that the price and probability are assigned by continually assessing the collective sentiment of its users regarding the likelihood of an event resulting in a yes or no. Sites like Kalshi don't use external polling data to assess the likelihood of a Trump or Harris victory, and instead rely solely on the betting behavior of their users to determine who is more likely to win. This can make these sites subject to self-selection bias, where the odds represent the sentiment of people who choose to bet on elections rather than the sentiments of a randomized group of voters. For instance, according to Wired, 3/4 of traffic to the betting site Polymarket comes from men, so that site's odds wouldn't be representative of the American electorate as a whole. And this might be fine if all of these bettors were trading rationally and betting solely on external information. But if election bets remain as a way to back one's beliefs, then these odds just represent the voting behavior of a non-representative section of voters. But at the end of the day, the biggest concern with election betting isn't how accurate it can be, but the danger it could pose to our democracy. In a system where the assumed odds of victory for a candidate are solely determined by the amount of money wagered on them, there's the possibility of large bets placed on certain candidates with the intent to change odds in their favor. For instance, in 1892, Republican campaign managers purposely bet large amounts at more favorable odds for their own candidate, leading newspapers the next day to report that that candidate was performing better in the polls than he actually was. More recently, in 2012, one single bettor on the site InTrade accounted for 1/3 of the total money placed on Mitt Romney to win the presidential election in the 2 weeks leading up to the election, single-handedly pushing up his odds of victory on the site. Market manipulation like this could have tangible effects on the election, influencing campaign morale, fundraising, and even voter turnout. So take any betting odds you see on the election with a grain of salt, because they're not as foolproof as some would have you believe. Also, instead of gambling your next 3 paychecks on Trump winning, make a bet with your friend to push them around in a wheelbarrow. That sounds so much more fun.